I'm Pavel Pish, curator of visual arts and collection strategy here at the Walker. We are thrilled to have you all join us here to celebrate the opening of Christine Sun Kim All Day, All Night. Before we begin, I would like to ground us by acknowledging that the Walker Art Center and the Minneapolis Sculpture Garden are located on the contemporary, traditional, and ancestral homelands of the Dakota people. This site, which was once an expanse of marshland and meadow, holds meaning for the Dakota, Ojibwe, and indigenous people from other native nations who still live in the community today. And now it is my great pleasure to acknowledge the generous supporters of this exhibition. On behalf of the Walker and our partner, the Whitney Museum of American Art, I want to express our deep gratitude to 4 national foundations for their lead support of our work to organize, present, and tour this exhibition. I'd like to thank the Ford Foundation, the Tiger Foundation, the Terra Foundation for American Art, and the Andy Warhol Foundation for the Visual Arts. I also want to recognize the Korea Foundation for its generous support of both the Walker's presentation and the Whitney's premiere in New York last spring. And I would like to extend a warm welcome to Assistant Director of the Korea Foundation US, Jung-Yi Jung, who is with us today. We have several close friends to thank for supporting our presentation here in Minneapolis. We are very grateful to the KHR McNeely Family Foundation, with thanks to Kevin, Rosemary, and Hannah Rose McNeely, and a very special welcome to Rosemary, who is with us here today. I would also like to welcome and express my heartfelt thanks to Louis Baskerville, Walker trustee Jan Breyer, Walker trustee Michael Peterman and his husband David Wilson, ID German Schonheimer, Walker trustee Susan White and her husband Rob, and Rosina Lee Yui. We are incredibly grateful for your generous support of this exhibition and for all that you do to support the Walker year after year. I would also like to welcome exhibition co-curators for this exhibition who are with us today. Jenny Goldstein, Marion Bolton Kippy Stroud, curator of the collection at the Whitney Museum of American Art. That's a long one. And Tom Finkelpel, independent curator, as well as Rose Pallone, curatorial assistant at the Whitney. Thank you all for joining us here today. Co-organized by the Walker Art Center and the Whitney Museum, All Day, All Night surveys Christine Sun Kim's entire artistic output from 2011 to 2026, featuring works ranging from her early career performance documentation to recent site-responsive murals. The exhibition points to the vitality Kim brings to her practice. It is a score in perpetual motion, a testament to her relentless experimentation and the possibilities of deaf sonic experience. Christine is going to be joined here today by longtime friend and fellow Christine Y. Kim, the recent Britain Family Curator at Large of North American Art at Tate Modern in London. Bios for both speakers can be found in the program notes. As you entered the cinema, you received a piece of paper. We encourage you to write down any questions that may come up during the dialogue. Once you've written a question, you can hold onto your card until the Q&A begins and then pass your note card to the end of your row and an usher will collect the cards. The speakers will answer a few of the audience questions today. You can access descriptions of the images on screen by scanning the QR code in your program, or if you're watching online, by clicking the link in the description on the YouTube page. With that, please join me in welcoming Christine Sun Kim and Christine Y. Kim to the stage.
Welcome. Middle age. Should I say that again? Okay. My name is Christine Y. Kim. I'm a middle-aged Asian woman with long black hair wearing a gray suit.
And I'm Christine Sun Kim. I go by CK. And I am a Korean American, middle-aged, I suppose, woman with short hair, circular rimmed glasses, tank top, and a scarf because I'm a little cold. Burr.
Thank you, Walker Art Museum. Thank you, Pavel Pish and the staff here for inviting us to do this talk. on the occasion of this extraordinary exhibition, Christine Sun Kim, All Day, All Night, which was co-organized by the Walker and the Whitney Museum of American Art. I want to start by mentioning something. Thich Nhat Hanh, the Zen Buddhist monk, teacher, author who died recently, said before he died that the next Buddha will come in the form of the Sangha. And the Sangha means the people and the power of community. And given all that Minneapolis has gone through over the past year or so, I just extend that to you because as the rest of us around the world, around the country, I live in Los Angeles, Christine lives in Berlin, we have been watching, and I really feel that in the people here. So thank you, I honor you with that. So let's get started. Can we start on slide 1, please? So given Christine's interest in image, infographics, symbols, and humor, I just threw the sun and the Y, shoulders up in there, because it's really great to be in conversation, to have two Christine Kims up on the stage. We've been...
It's also very YMCA. That emoji, it's like the Y of YMCA.
And of course, with the humor in Christine's work, it's nice to start off with a little bit of that. So I want to start by setting the stage a bit. There are a number of artists whose work you've cited as influential in how they experiment with sound and image, exploring writing and scores, language and graphics, such as Pauline Oliveros and John Cage, and how they work with sound. Ed Ruscha's graphic language. Namjoon Paik's perpetual pushing of the boundaries of sound, instrumentation, and performance. Christian Marclay for multiple points of entry into sound and action, and Glenn Ligon for his work using text and inhabiting different voices. How do you approach making work about sound?
Wait, I'm trying to find Brandon. Next slide, please. Oh, we forgot to do this. Maybe we can add this story first before I answer the question.
Go ahead.
So Hank Willis Thomas is an amazing artist, and I've met him at some conferences here and there. And at a dinner one time, he asked if he could have the honor to introduce me to the other Christine Kim. And at this point, I had moved to New York, and I would sometimes email a gallery, and they would think that I was Christine Y. Kim. And sometimes I would get Christine Y. Kim's mail, catalogs, books. And so I'm like, obviously, this is a woman who gets free shit. This is pretty cool. And so then he made the connection between the two of us. And then I was in California visiting my family. And at that time, Christine worked at LACMA. And so we got to get lunch together, typed this out, and sent this photo to Hank. Next slide. So your question around sound and how do I approach making art with sound as a medium, I would say that when I first discovered sound art to me, I had to ask myself as a deaf person, what does sound mean? If I'm going to use this as a medium, does it make me less deaf, I wondered? And quite frankly, I had an identity crisis for the first few years, and I didn't know where to start. But the obvious place to start is with low frequency sounds, so that's what I did. And then I kind of scratched that itch and I moved on, and then I was able to engage with sound as something that I could loan, which is a similar experience that I do with interpreters. I trust them to voice for me. So basically I'm the score and they are performing me as the score. And so that's one example with this drawing here, pianissimo, worst finish. And so I was kind of playing with the notation of piano, and obviously I took my own version of what it meant. I wanted to embrace it and then use it if I wanted to use it however way. So I was like, what if I use piano 10x? Because I know that piano means to play that note quietly. And so if there's a P in the score, it's a quieter note. And if there's more pianos, pianissimos, it can be the most quiet note ever, but it's never silent. And I thought that was interesting. So that's what I was playing with. And that brought me to here, which is the sound of gravity doing its thing. And so then I started looking at sound as a concept. So it wasn't just sound in and of itself, but what it could mean and what I could do with it. And I realized that I could use sound to measure the entirety of one day, starting with the first P at the beginning of the day and the last P at the end of the day. So you can see I have kind of a quiet morning. And then you can see that I'm kind of waking up, getting adjusted to the day. And then F for forte is to play a note loudly. And so this is the louder parts of my day. Next slide, please. This is the sound of constipation. Okay, yes, perfect. And as I was going through life, I am going through different identities, and I became a mother at one point. And oftentimes with motherhood, you have this connection to the umbilical cord, to the baby, to the rest of your body. And quite frankly, I was struggling with constipation. And so this is my piece about motherhood. There's a lot of P's. So it was very quiet in here. Things were not moving. And obviously, Christine, feel free to interrupt me at any time. So the sound of temperature rising was my first mural. So I was experimenting with scale and space. And at that time, I knew that sound didn't have to be a sound itself, and it didn't have to mean something with sound itself. I was deciding that sound could be something. So sound could be weather, it could be temperature, it could be table, it could be anything I wanted. And so I decided to kind of use musical notation as a way to distort what sound meant. And I was using musical notation and music as a vehicle to communicate deaf ideas and deaf lives and deaf experience. And so I was trying to shift the meaning of sound and how the music world uses it. There's so many rules in the world of music, but conceptual art is a very good tool to break rules with.
And was the choice to go to a larger scale with this piece in particular related to temperature being atmospheric, expanding across a large amount of space? Is that analog here?
You could say that. Also, lines are very analog as well. Mm-hmm. And you can see that the notes are at the bottom. And then as you get to the top of the line, they start to disperse, to break up, to multiply. Mm-hmm.
Go to the next slide.
Oh yeah, let's. So this is at Aranya Art Center, which is like a resort city that's outside of Beijing in China. It's quite nice, and we went to a museum there, and you can see that this space looks a little bit dirty because they were deinstalling something, and I could see the architecture of the space, and I found that this curved wall that eventually creates a hole in the ceiling was quite compelling, and I always think the bigger the better. Mm-hmm. And I liked the movement of the space, and so for the sign, to gloss it in English, is I spot, which means to notice something or to see something. But I feel like to sign it, I spot, has a nice rhythm. And so then I turned that into one note. So beginning at I, circling around, and ending at spot. Mm-hmm. So I was able to bring ASL and musical notation together. And in the next slide, yes, perfect. Mm-hmm. This is right after the first lockdown in 2020 with the pandemic, and I was struggling with this experience. And so I was experimenting with pyramid rhythms, and I was also scrolling all the time, mm-hmm. and trying to figure out what was happening in the world, mm-hmm. right? and seeing that this was a historic moment in our lives and in time, but there was so much misinformation and it felt like things were out of control, but we were being controlled. And so there was this rhythm where I would wake up, check my phone, wake up, check my phone. And so I turned that rhythm into my daily life, into this drawing.
I'm
Next
curious to know if during COVID, given that so much of your work is connected to your responses to people having responses to you, or or therein, and without that type of interaction, that then these sort of cataloging your day, cataloging these various types of interior experiences that I think we all had in isolation.
Absolutely.
But that how that kind of how did that come into the work?
No, that's such a good question. This was right when, I would maybe have to leave for a doctor's appointment or something like that. I had never experienced this kind of repulsion, if you will, of other people away from me. It almost felt like I was diseased and I didn't realize it, but I also felt less safe. And then I realized, right, I'm also in Germany, so I'm not in LA or New York. And there were responses to people in LA and in New York, but I was in Germany, historically a white country, and that did give me anxiety. So you're right. Yes, this did it as well, acknowledge that experience.
Continue with the slides a bit further.
Oh, I should have switched the order on this because this was right before the lockdown. So I was asked to perform the national anthem in America the Beautiful right before the pandemic hit, right before we knew what was happening, right before everyone got locked down. And I had spent months working on my translation, practicing my performance, soliciting advice from my friends to make sure the translation was what I wanted. And then with my interpreter, Beth, the voice that you hear right now, actually, her and I were at the rehearsal for
And we're talking about the Super Bowl, just to be clear, yeah? Okay. No,
okay. Sorry if I didn't say Super Bowl or if Beth messed that up. So thank you, Christine. But yes, this was when I went to the Super Bowl on behalf of the National Association for the Deaf. They typically elect or select one or two performers every year to do the pre-show. Now it's gotten to the point where they do the pre-show and the halftime, and it's 3 or 4 people. And they just did this year Bad Bunny's halftime performance, not through NAD, but there is still people who are chosen to perform. But for my experience in 2020, I performed this on a global scale, and then right after that, the world stopped. The world closed. The world wasn't moving forward, but my mind was. I kept thinking about this performance, thinking about this experience, and it was weird because we were locked down into our house. And so what I did is I took my translation of the performance, which I'd already translated from English into ASL, into my body with sign language, and then into my mind, because I kept thinking about it, onto paper ultimately. And so there are all these steps along the way that got me to this piece.
In the interest of time, I'm going to move on to my next question, but we can come back to any of these slides if necessary.
Okay, next slide.
I want to talk about time a bit, which of course is indicated when you first walk in the show All Day, All Night. When I saw the show at the Whitney, it really struck me to see so many references to time. And these are just some of the phrases and sayings that appear in some of the works. When future briefly pauses, too much future, when past takes over future, please keep me posted, kindly notify me if there is any progress, one quick past, one recent past, owes me time, rest again, I owe you, turning clock, TBD, TBC, TBA. Also even, and I hadn't really thought about this before, but thinking about debt. We all live in the future like debt, but you may go buy a car, you may go to college, but that references a kind of a future around paying. And Seth Kim Cohen in the catalog talks about how future or futurity is a key component of contemporary capitalism. So we all live in a bit of the future, like debt. And he says in the catalog, quote, "Debt is money conceived as time, or time reconfigured as money. When money takes the form of time, it also takes the form of creator or destroyer. So time really plays a major role in your work. How did you come up with the title of the exhibition, All Day, All Night, and what does it mean? And maybe if you can talk a bit about how you think about time, because of course, time is rhythm, time in signing. Time sort of has a different role for you.
So I want to say that I did not come up with the title for the exhibition. It was the curators who did. And so I want to give them full credit for that. Prior to that, I had been thinking about time. I mean, a lot of deaf life is full of echoes. And so I thought about the idea of these echoes continuing on, echoing upon themselves. And an echo is such an excellent example of the deaf experience. Like Beth is echoing what I'm saying right now, and then the interpreters echo what you say to the audience. And then we also have interpreters echoing what someone's saying and another person's saying. And I became obsessed with this concept. But obsession is something that takes place all day, all night. And so if you look at my arm, there's the line of the horizon, and then you can see the sun giving to day and night. And so these are the signs for all day, all night. All day. And the lines match the sign for both all day and all night. Next slide. And then this here, so you saw in the beginning, these were drawings that were in black and white and things like this. But watch me sign all day. And then this is kind of like every day. But you can also modify the pacing of the day. You could do it all day. And you can feel it. You can feel time being stretched by your own decisions. And I became obsessed with that. And so this piece here, All Day, All Night 2023, is shaped canvas of the space that is taken up by the sign All Day, All Night.
You know what I just realized? You know, I remember I was taking a media ecology class in grad school, and the professor was telling us that language is digital, and I was disagreeing. And in Korean, especially, where you want to emphasize something, and often in relation to time, you will extend that word. So, 쭉 가세요 means go a really, really long way, as opposed to 쭉 가세요. It's down the way, as opposed to down the way. So you really extend that and use time to emphasize that. Or like if you want to say very,
really?
say 아주, you know, you'll extend that and you'll say it slowly to really emphasize it's very, very, it's extremely. But I'm just making this connection now in the way that the speed of the movement in signing makes a reference to extend the meaning of that adjective or what the description. So sorry for the interruption.
No, of course. It's not just that this takes place in ASL or in spoken Korean. All languages have their own sense of time. And some languages like to have a lot of small words to make up one sentence, or like German, one huge word to combine multiple words together. And so culture and history always impact the time of languages. And I feel like in ASL, I can bounce amongst different timelines and do that quite easily.
Slides then.
This is a good one. I can talk about this, or should we move ahead? Or I can explain it. Could you go back one, please? Another back, yes. So this piece is titled FOMO Scores.
That's FOMO, FOMO.
Thank you, yes. In the deaf community, there's a ton of FOMO. I am a person who struggles with FOMO. If I'm not invited or what's going on over there and I need to know who was there. And so to sign score, it's like this. You can see me doing this. And you can see where my elbow is and where the top of my pointer finger is. And that creates the shape of this canvas behind us. And so I painted all of these black. And then next slide, please. I just kind of used some generic messages that I've done around FOMO, like, please keep me posted, things like this. And then I set it up like it was in an orchestra format, because I'm trying to tell you, please respond to my email. And using white lettering on a black background means I could not be any clearer, but I also experience these requests just falling into the black void of nothingness. Keep going. Ooh, here. Yeah. So just a bit of promo. Who's wearing this shirt right now? Because it's in the gift shop at the Walker. Stand up if you're wearing it. Do a spin. So again, this was during the pandemic. What year does this say? 2022. We are still finding our way through. But at one point earlier on in the pandemic, Queens, New York was the epicenter of the pandemic. So it was the worst place for the pandemic for people to be. And so I was going through a phase as well, artistically, where I was noticing that the motion lines of comics kind of reflected notational lines in music. And so these lines indicate signs, but there's nobody signing, but it's showing where the sign, where you need to move your hands in order to perform the sign or to sign it. So time, double tap, O, one tap, me, impact cloud on chest, rest, impact cloud on shoulders, again. And so I decided to do self-referential, or signs that touch a part of your body. So again, having to touch my palm, time having to touch my wrist, my shoulders, my chest. And so I turned this into a one-line poem in English, so that way this could also connect with hearing audiences as well. And if we go to the next slide, I can show you the animation of the motion lines in order to sign this one-line poem. So you can see there's a lot of rhythm in there. Next slide. Next slide.
Go to the next question, because I think that's a really great segue into the newer work, where clearly you're using the notational signs, you're using the shapes and the forms of signs, a sort of silhouette. But your more recent work focuses on a lexicon of signs where your hand touches the body. And I'm wondering if you could talk about this more recent work. I mean, the work in the exhibition covers about 10 years of work, and this is something that you've already started on and you're working on now.
Next slide. So this drawing here has led me to a bigger series of work around the word mind and the sign for mind. And you can show the hardness of a rock in sign language like I'm showing you here. So you can do mine, rock, mine, tough, mine, stone. For me, it's mine, rock, and it shows like your mind is as fixed as hard as a stone is. This is quite big, and the text here says mind strong, and the text for mind is where I would point to sign mind, and the text strong is where my hands would be to sign strong. And then here it's actually a little bit harder to see, but it should say mind up at the top. I think it's just hidden under the caption line. So it has mind, and then it says touch, but I've drawn the space or the mass that your mind takes up to be kind of suffocating the corner. And so when you mind touch, what that means is that you are thinking about this a lot. You can't untouch what's in your mind. And so whatever is in your mind, intangible, you move to your hand, tangible, and then you think about it again and again, and that becomes something that you become fixated on, and you can't release your hand from it. And so eventually when you think about this over and over again, your mind kind of takes over what you're thinking about, what you touch, and that suffocates your mind in the corner. And now this drawing says mind up in the corner again and touch, touch, touch. Next one. So there's a optimistic view on this and a pessimistic view on this. So this could be a clash of two minds. And so this is two different mindsets meeting each other. And that's similar to like me and my daughter. We argue about things. We don't always agree. And now that I have two daughters, I just made a new drawing where there's three minds. And so is it mom against the kids, or is it one kid and mom versus the other kid? You know, these kind of experiences that you have as a family. But this can also show intimacy, that like your mind and another mind come together, you share one, you think the same. Oh. I think I think we can just let the slides end.
I want to move on to humor. Clearly, there's a lot of humor in the exhibition. The works are undeniably funny, at times pointing out absurdities. In the roundtable in the exhibition catalog with the show's curators, Jenny Goldstein, Tom Finkelpearl, and Pavel Pish, Tom, who showed us his beautiful shirt over there, mentions a New York Times article in which artist Finnegan Shannon praises the playfulness of Emily Gousseau's solo show, noting, quote, people in the mainstream culture tend to talk about disability in somber terms. Let me give you enough time. Which is always such a funny contrast to my experience as a disabled person, where there's a lot of humor, to which you agree. To say this dynamic often makes people hardwired to rebel. This is you saying this. I think there's also a kind of seriousness about being an immigrant. Again, this is you. Sorry, I failed to mention when the quote started. Often based on our parents' trauma and fear and being raised to be humble, this is me now, to be humble, serious, and work hard, fit in. And for you, again, perhaps now living as an immigrant in Germany, when every T needs to be crossed, every I needs to be dotted with no suspicious responses, errors, or unusual activity. And humor in this humanizes us, and you really put that out there in the work. So I wanted to talk about how you use humor, and this is just one sort of example or situation, but that there's this kind of, pushing up against or rejecting a kind of seriousness, but also sort of developing that in your own sort of series of sub-languages almost.
Could you repeat the question?
Well, maybe
or like reframe it
to like that humor comes into your work because there's such a seriousness around people, the way people treat disability, as well as in this your sort of intersectional identity, also as an immigrant. And so humor feels very natural to you, and it really comes out in your work. If you could talk about that a bit.
Yeah, I also will say, I think it comes from the time that I lived in New York. New York is kind of the place where I was able to socialize with you folks, hearing people. I grew up with a deaf sister. I was in a huge deaf program that was mainstreamed in a public school. There was like 100 of us deaf students, basically the same size as a state deaf school. So I basically never left my deaf bubble, and that continued to college. And it wasn't until I was in New York City where I stepped out of my deaf bubble and I encountered a lot of experiences because people are just in your personal space in New York all the time. So you're shoulder to shoulder with strangers on the subway or at bars. And so I discovered that when I encountered the shock of somebody upon meeting somebody not like them, humor was the quickest way to get them out of shock and forward into connecting with me. So humor kind of made them relax, get their wall down. And so I used humor to get what I needed. And so it became a tool that then became part of my practice, and now it shows up in my work. But for a long time, I actually didn't want to share my rage, so to speak. I didn't feel safe doing so. And I also felt like rage was too serious, far too serious, far too deep, far too heavy for audiences. But it wasn't until I felt like my platform had gotten to a place where I could then disclose and share my rage. But obviously, in order to communicate it in the way that I wanted to, I used humor. Because if I was raging in my rage, people wouldn't stay in the room with me. But humor disarms them and allows them to absorb what I'm trying to say.
I'm wondering, sorry, I don't see Brandon, but there you are, Brandon. Were there questions that that have come in, or should we do the questions? Okay, did you pass out pieces of paper? Sorry. Okay, so pieces of paper should have been distributed to you all. If you do have questions written down on them and could pass them to the usher, there's one coming down either aisle. Right. Okay, and then I'll ask one more question while we kind of get these together. People have called your work political, and I know this is, there are many different answers to this question. How do you respond to this?
So I know I can't avoid this. Like everything I do, everything I make, every interview I have is always political. I think it's something that's unavoidable. So that's my answer. You know, it's like I'm not going to deny that or resist that. However, I do hope in the future people could perhaps find my work not political. Like I want to work with flowers and paint dogs. I don't know.
Yeah. And I think that inherently, if you are politicized and you are seen as a certain way, whether you are asking for it or, you know, participate in it or not, that making work about being in that position, that there's a different kind of way in which political or it can be thought of as political. Would you agree with that?
Say the last part again.
Let me rephrase that. I'm not doing a very good job of asking this question. That being in a politicized position, you know, being called disabled, being called deaf, being called Asian American, being called an immigrant, you know, whatever it might be. And that if you're, I guess, you know, unconsciously, actively, or in whatever kind of way, that you're making work that addresses that, being seen that way and responding to that in some way.
Yes, I agree. And actually, while you were forming your question, I was thinking about how this is, in my opinion, and I think it's in fact happening, but a lot of the deaf schools all over the world are closing down. I was just in Hong Kong last week, and I found out that at this point, they only have one deaf school left that's open and operating, and one school that deaf kids can enroll in to be with their peers. Now, a lot of deaf clubs also are closing down, but the one here in the Twin Cities is still strong. I actually got to visit it last year. I love that deaf club here. But it feels like seeing all these closures, seeing these spaces disappear, means that sign language is disappearing. But that also means that my work becomes even more political, which is ironic that it's a converse relationship.
Right.
Yeah, it feels strange.
Thank you, Christine. So it looks like we have some questions here. Thank you, Brandon. How would you compare your first experience working with an art institution versus now? What were some of the challenges?
That's a good question. So now it's much easier to ask what I want. Whereas earlier on or in the beginning, I heard no a lot, and I heard that we don't have a budget for that a lot. Because oftentimes institutions or museums do have an accessibility budget, but that's only for visitors. So since I'm not there as a visitor, I'm there as an artist, or I'm there for a program, something that is in the system, something that's part of the exhibition, they didn't have accessibility budget set aside for me. It's almost like when engaging with universities, they have an accessibility budget for their students who are enrolling in the college, but as a maybe visiting artist or visiting lecturer, they don't have accessibility budget for me. So at the Museum of Modern Art in 2013, which is in New York City, I was part of a group show for sound, and they were having an opening reception for that exhibition, and they told me that they couldn't provide interpreters for me for that night. And the curators didn't agree with that, and so they managed to scrounge around some money from the curatorial budget instead of the accessibility budget. And that has mostly been my experience until now. I don't have as many issues, but I also work with so many great teams who support what I do. I also have an accessibility writer, and so the requests come through that. And then I have people I work with who kind of advocate for me or get my requests across and approved so I can focus on making art. But I'm also working more internationally now than ever. And in some ways, I feel like I'm back to the beginning of that struggle cycle, if you will, depending on the country, because maybe they don't have the understanding or the laws in place. So like in the US, I feel like I'm now able to have my requests granted, but in some countries, I feel like I'm starting out where I was 15 years ago. So the US is pretty good, the UK is pretty good, but there are also laws and protection that allow me to be as successful as I am there.
But I think also people's understanding of your work, now that it's been in circulation for a bit, has been transformative. I think about the Whitney Museum and Whitney Signs, which you essentially instituted. Is that right? Early on?
Yeah.
And even at Gyopo, which is a diasporic Korean nonprofit, which I co-founded, and we have a couple of people in the audience who flew in from LA to support you. We were able to work with you early on, and that led to Gyopo guaranteeing ASL for anyone who RSVPs and requests it. So I think sort of your work being out in the world.
But that's also thanks to your effort as well and the work that you did.
We're congratulating each other. You said
Cheers.
that you came a little later to your Korean identity, that you were sort of it was your deaf identity first that you were sort of addressing head on, and then later your Korean identity. This person who's asking the question is wondering if I'm wondering if, especially as you're raising 2 Korean kids now, if you think it'll be a bigger part of your art, a more explicit part of your art, sorry. It seems like it's almost like a 2-part question. You coming to your Koreanness and that aspect of your identity first, and sort of now being a mother.
Yes, so I had kind of started this process around identity before having 2 kids, because I had moved to Germany and started being seen as an Asian person first rather than a deaf person first, which I usually am a deaf person first in the US, so that had been my experience for most of my life. And I also experienced a lot of like racism in Germany that was a little bit more soft and subtle, but more prevalent. So I became maybe more aware that I was Asian than ever. So thankfully, with the Gyopo group and being able to join and be a part of it, I found that there was a space where we could just be amongst each other creative artists and not anything else. And then I had 2 children, and of course, my reaction to my identities is enhanced. It becomes louder. It becomes a question that's something more tangible, something that I'm really asking myself and wondering around my identity. My oldest child goes to Korean school in Berlin, and that's my way of just making sure that that girl is Korean as can be. And, you know, Christine and I were just talking about the fact that there's a summer camp in Seoul for kids, and it doesn't suit my kids' school schedule, but that would be something that I would consider. But yeah, it comes up in my work no matter what.
A question that I think some of the works in the exhibition address, but perhaps more directly, this person is asking about a few differences that you see between how hearing and deaf audiences respond to your art.
Oh, yeah. There are very few pieces that are obviously hearing centric. So like Game of Skill, which is up in the gallery, which has the electronic piece that you engage with the strip of Velcro, that's very much a hearing piece. But in general, most of my works are for anyone. But I will say that oftentimes the deaf community gives me validation around some of the work that I do, that deaf people will be like, oh, you have that? Well, don't worry, I do too. And I'm like, great, I'm not the only deaf person who experiences that. A bunch of us do. That's really affirming. And sometimes I can find myself using a hearing lens on my work. And I realize that that's not actually how I think. It's more like the hearing centric world entering its view through my mind and my hands. But so then when I get deaf validation, it feels really good. But I also get the response that some people say, like, this is so specific, so detailed, so closed that I don't understand it and need more explanation. But there's also an amount of my viewers, or for people who experience my work, who feel like it's general enough that they can make their own connection, and that way I can connect with them.
Your work has really evolved in 10 years, which is a relatively short period of time if you think of, you know, you're working before that, and you'll have many years of working ahead of you. And there's been quite significant evolution in your practice in terms of medium and form, and some of the topics that we've already discussed in this talk. But one viewer is curious to know about how that evolution continues in this moment.
So I feel like with this survey show, I've got those years under my belt, so to say. And a lot of ideas that I've had in the beginning of my career still persist, but these are ideas that evolve over time. So even All Day, All Night started up as a drawing and then now has evolved into shaped canvas. And so it's not so much that my practice evolves, but rather the ideas themselves grow and evolve over time.
Well, we look forward to the many things that you have in the future, and hope that you'll come visit us in the U.S. often. And I think this is the end of our program today. Thank you so much, Christine, and thank you, Walker Museum.
Thank you, thank you.